So go ahead and lie down and make yourselves comfortable. And this is the first of many open focus practices. And you could do this in sitting as well, but for class we're lying. Make yourself comfortable. If you need to bend your knees or bend one knee, anything to minimize the distraction of physical discomfort. And just begin by noticing if you can imagine letting your mind and body naturally and effortlessly respond to the following questions concerning your ability to imagine certain experiences. It's usually easier to imagine or realize the experience of space, initially emphasizing the feeling of space with your eyes closed. And see if you can imagine not giving any particular effort to listening to the question or to achieving any of the associated images or experiences. Can you imagine that your ideal response is whatever spontaneously happens to your multi-sensory imagination or experience when a particular question is asked? So I'll be asking a number of questions that start with, can you imagine? The nature of your experience will naturally change and deepen with continued practice. And just see if you can imagine that the opening and expanding awareness of your emerging experience is a continuing process. And just see if you can imagine giving emphasis to imagining the feeling of space. Can you imagine the space that this whole room occupies? And can you imagine paying attention to the feeling of space that your whole body occupies? Imagine sensing the space inside of you as your breath flows naturally and easily in and out. Is it possible for you to imagine the space inside your nose as you inhale and exhale? Can you imagine the breath flowing as if behind your eyes as you inhale naturally? Imagine paying attention to the space inside your throat as you inhale and exhale. And can you imagine the space inside your mouth and cheeks? And then let's shift your attention to your hands. Just imagine the space that your hands occupy. And can you imagine the sense of the presence of your thumbs? Imagine paying attention to the feeling of the space that each of your thumbs occupy. Remembering that If any of this is difficult or you can't imagine it, it's fine. Just allow what happens to happen. And then imagine the feeling of space around the presence of your thumbs. Imagine that you could feel that the boundaries of your thumbs are dissolving. Can you imagine that the feeling of the space inside your thumbs is continuous with the space outside your thumbs? And then see if you can imagine feeling the sense of the presence of your index fingers. Can you imagine paying attention to the feeling of a space around the sense of presence of your index fingers? So there's the space of your index fingers and there's the space around each of your index fingers. Just see if you can imagine that. Can you imagine the feeling that the boundaries of your index fingers are dissolving? Can you imagine that the feeling of space inside your fingers, index fingers, is continuous with the space outside your index fingers? And then see if you can imagine the space between the thumb and the index finger on each hand. And then very gently, very slowly, almost imperceptibly, can you imagine paying attention to the moving of your thumbs and index fingers just a little towards each other and alternately away from each other, while attending to the feeling of space between them as that space increases and decreases, narrowing and widening as you imagine the thumb and index fingers coming towards and away from each other. And then letting that go, can you imagine feeling the space between all of your fingers, just as you imagine the space between your thumb and your index finger? So the space between the index finger and the middle finger. Can you imagine the space between the middle finger and the ring finger? And the space between the ring fingers and the pinkies. Can you imagine the space that all of your fingers occupy and the space around all of your fingers? And can you imagine sensing that the space around all of your fingers and thumb is continuous with the space outside of your fingers? Can you imagine extending this sense of space inside and outside to the whole of your hand? Imagine extending that sense of space up your arm, inside and outside. Can you sense that feeling of space inside your chest and outside? Inside your head and outside. Inside and outside of your abdomen, your whole trunk, just imagining space inside, space outside, the imagination of the continuation, no boundaries, just dissolving into spaciousness. And the sense of space inside each of your legs and feet, outside each of your legs and feet. And you may notice that some areas are easier to sense the spaciousness. Maybe you can only imagine it in your hands. Maybe it's easy for you to extend it into your whole sense of body. And again, like we did in the beginning, can you imagine sensing the space in the whole of the room? Space of your body, dissolving into the space of the whole. And you can stay with this sense of spaciousness as long as you like, until you're ready to move on. Thank you.